My child, do not move past these words too quickly, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of something your heart has been sensing long before your mind could explain it. Pause here for a moment. There is a sentence your soulmate has been carrying in silence, a sentence they have started to say in their mind 100 times and then swallowed before it could ever reach you. And now, in this fictional message of divine reflection, heaven draws you into the moment they can no longer hide from what they feel. Their heart is standing at the edge of a confession, trembling beneath the weight of words they never imagined they would have to speak to you. The sentence begins like this: I never thought I'd have to say this to you, but, beloved, the truth behind those words is not what you think. It is deeper. It is more vulnerable. And before this message ends, you will understand why their silence has suddenly become heavier than distance itself. Something has changed inside them. Not in the shallow way people change their minds from one day to the next, but in the way a soul changes when it finally becomes exhausted from pretending it does not care. For a long time, your soulmate believed they could manage what they felt for you. They thought they could keep it controlled, neatly hidden behind ordinary conversations, delayed replies, distractions, responsibilities, pride, and the illusion that time would somehow make everything easier. They convinced themselves that if they did not speak about the connection, then perhaps the connection would become quieter. But what they failed to understand was that some emotions do not disappear when ignored. They grow roots. They begin moving beneath the surface. They appear in dreams, memories, sudden moments of longing, songs that feel too personal, places that unexpectedly remind them of you, and quiet nights when every distraction has finally gone silent. And lately, beloved, their inner world has become impossible to escape. There was a moment recently, an ordinary moment on the outside, that changed something inside them completely. No one around them would have noticed. There was no dramatic scene, no thunder in the sky, no obvious sign that something significant was happening. Yet in that quiet space, your soulmates suddenly imagined what their future would look like if you were truly no longer part of it. Not temporarily distant. Not simply unavailable for a few days. Gone from their emotional world completely. And the thought struck them harder than they expected. They had spent so much time protecting themselves from vulnerability that they never stopped to consider what that protection might cost them. For the first time, they could see the possibility of losing you not as some abstract fear, but as a real consequence of all the things they had left unsaid. That is when the sentence first came clearly into their mind: I never thought I'd have to say this to you. They almost laughed at themselves because the words sounded too serious, too dramatic, too exposing. But their heart knew exactly what they meant. They never thought they would have to admit that they were afraid. They never thought they would have to confess how much your presence had changed them. They never thought they would have to tell you that some of their distance was never about a lack of feeling. It was about having too much feeling and not knowing what to do with it. They never expected to care enough for silence to become painful. And they certainly never expected to reach a point where losing you would frighten them more than revealing themselves. Beloved, there is something important here. Your soulmate has been wrestling with two different versions of themselves. One version wants to remain composed, cautious, and protected. That version tells them not to say too much. It tells them to wait, to observe, to make sure they are not imagining the depth of this bond. It reminds them of old disappointments, moments when they trusted someone and regretted it, times when hope made them vulnerable. That version of them believes control equals safety. But another version has been rising. This version is tired of hiding behind emotional armor. It is tired of pretending that you are simply another person in their life when, inwardly, your name carries a different weight. This second version wants honesty, even if honesty changes everything. And that conflict is why their energy may have felt confusing. There have been times when they wanted to move closer and then unexpectedly pulled away. Moments when they almost said something meaningful, only to replace it with something ordinary. Times when they may have seemed emotionally present one day and strangely distant the next. It was not because their feelings vanished overnight. It was because every step toward vulnerability awakened something inside them that they had spent years learning to avoid. The closer they felt to you, the more they realized how much there was to lose. And that realization frightened them. But fear has begun to lose its power. Something happened inside your soulmate when they realized that protecting themselves might eventually become the very thing that pushes you away. That thought has been returning again and again. What if you interpret their silence as indifference? What if you grow tired of waiting for clarity? What if someone else enters your life who is brave enough to give you the emotional certainty they kept withholding? What if one day they finally become ready to speak, only to discover you are no longer listening? These questions have begun pressing against them with an urgency they cannot ignore. And now the sentence has evolved. I never thought I'd have to say this to you. But I was wrong. Beloved, those 4 words carry more than they seem to. Your soulmate has been wrong about several things. They were wrong to believe they could keep their feelings contained forever. They were wrong to assume you would somehow always understand what they never explained. They were wrong to think emotional distance would automatically protect everyone involved. They were wrong to imagine that time would make this connection easier to dismiss. And most painfully, they were wrong about how deeply you had already affected their life. You entered spaces inside them that they did not know were still reachable. You awakened questions they had stopped asking. Questions about love, timing, trust, destiny, partnership, and what it means to truly feel seen. There was something about your energy, your way of being, your emotional presence, or even the mystery surrounding you that challenged their usual patterns. They could not categorize you easily. They could not place the connection into some familiar box. And whenever a bond cannot be easily explained, people often try to control it by creating distance. But distance did not erase you. It amplified you. Your absence became a kind of mirror. Whenever you were not around, they noticed the difference. Conversations with others felt normal, but something was missing. Busy days could distract them temporarily, but eventually a quiet moment would arrive and your memory would return without permission. Sometimes it was something small, a phrase you once used, a place they associated with you, a song, a color, a certain hour of the day. Other times it was stronger, almost like an emotional wave arriving from nowhere. And each time this happened, they questioned themselves, why does this person stay on my mind like this? Why does this connection feel unfinished? Why do I keep imagining conversations we have never had? They tried to answer logically. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was attachment. Perhaps it was simply because things had been left unresolved. But deeper down, they knew the truth was more complicated. You had touched something in them that logic alone could not explain. And that is why their coming confession carries so much weight. Because your soulmate is not preparing to tell you something casual. They are preparing to say something that may force them to confront everything they have been avoiding. There is a difference between saying, "I miss you," and saying, "I have been pretending I don't." There is a difference between saying, "I care about you," and admitting, "I cared so much that I became afraid of what this connection could mean." There is a difference between telling someone, "I made a mistake," and confessing, "My mistake may have cost us something precious." Your soulmate is moving toward the second kind of truth. They are beginning to understand that love is not always lost because people stop feeling. Sometimes it is lost because people wait too long to become honest. That realization has shaken them. Beloved, imagine the inner conversation they have been having. They picture speaking to you. In one version, you listen quietly and understand everything. In another, you are hurt. In another, you ask why they did not say this sooner. And that question is the one they fear most because they do not have a simple answer. How could they explain that they were trying to protect themselves? How could they admit that pride, uncertainty, fear, and old wounds all became tangled together? How could they tell you that sometimes they wanted you to reach toward them while simultaneously making themselves difficult to reach? They know it sounds contradictory. Because it was. The heart can become incredibly contradictory when it wants intimacy but fears rejection. It can create tests no one agreed to take. It can hide feelings and then feel hurt when those feelings are not recognized. It can push someone away and secretly hope they stay. Your soulmate is beginning to see these contradictions in themselves more clearly now. And that awareness has brought both regret and humility. There is another layer, beloved, and this is where the story becomes even more personal. Your soulmate has started questioning whether you still feel the same way about them. For a long time, they assumed the connection would remain emotionally available whenever they were finally ready. Perhaps they never said this aloud, but somewhere inside they believed there would always be more time. More time to understand. More time to decide. More time to speak. More time to fix whatever was left unresolved. Then something shifted. Maybe they noticed a change in your energy. Maybe you became quieter. Maybe you stopped reaching out in the same way. Maybe they simply imagined you emotionally detaching and realized that possibility hurt more than they expected. Whatever triggered it, a new fear entered their mind. What if I waited too long? That thought has become difficult for them to escape. And now they are not merely thinking about what they feel. They are thinking about consequences. There is a moment coming in this narrative where your soulmate stops asking, "Should I say something?" and begins asking, "What happens if I don't?" That shift matters because fear can delay someone for a long time, but the fear of permanent regret can eventually become stronger than the fear of vulnerability. They are approaching that threshold. And when they cross it, the words they have been rehearsing may surprise even them. I never thought I'd have to say this to you, but I need you to know that I was never as unaffected as I looked. Beloved, pause on that. Never as unaffected as they looked. There were moments when you may have wondered whether you mattered. Moments when their behavior seemed too calm compared to what you felt inside. Times when you questioned whether you imagined the intensity. But inside their private world, things were not as quiet as they appeared. They simply became skilled at hiding emotional storms behind ordinary expressions. There were days they wanted to contact you and stopped themselves. Times they reread something connected to you. Moments they wondered whether you were thinking about them. Nights when they imagined what they would say if the two of you could speak with no pride, no fear, no interruptions, and no past standing between you. And lately, that imagined conversation has become more specific. They picture telling you that something about you changed the way they see love. Not because everything between you was perfect. Sometimes the most transformative connections are not perfect at all. They are mirrors. They expose emotional patterns. They reveal where people hide. They awaken wounds that need healing and desires that have been ignored. Your connection forced your soulmate to confront parts of themselves they preferred to leave sleeping. At first, they blamed the intensity on you. They thought perhaps you were too emotionally powerful for them. Too difficult to forget. Too capable of making them feel vulnerable. But slowly, they began to realize the deeper truth: you were not creating all of these feelings inside them. You were revealing what was already there. You became the mirror. And mirrors can be uncomfortable when someone has spent years avoiding their own reflection. That is why some of their resistance was never truly resistance to you. It was resistance to what being close to you required them to become. More honest. More emotionally accountable. More courageous. Less protected by old stories. Your soulmate may have wanted the connection without the transformation. But those two things could not be separated. And now, beloved, something within them has surrendered to that truth. This awareness is making them restless. There is a conversation they know must eventually happen. But there is still something they have not decided how to tell you. Something that changes the meaning of their opening words. I never thought I'd have to say this to you. At first, you may hear that sentence and assume it means goodbye. It sounds like the beginning of an ending. It sounds like someone preparing to deliver painful news. And perhaps that is why your heart was drawn toward this message in the first place. There is an emotional tension in those words, a sense that something important has reached the edge. But what if it is not the beginning of goodbye? What if it is the end of pretending? Your soulmate never thought they would have to tell you how close they came to giving up on the possibility of the two of you. Not because they stopped caring. Because they convinced themselves caring was dangerous. They tried to imagine another path. A simpler path. One where they did not have to confront the intensity, uncertainty, or vulnerability connected to you. They told themselves perhaps life would be easier if they simply accepted that some connections are meant to remain unfinished. But something happened when they tried to accept that ending. They did not feel peace. They felt grief. Quiet grief. Private grief. The kind nobody sees because there is no official loss to explain. How do you mourn a future that never fully happened? How do you explain missing conversations that were never spoken? How do you grieve a person who still exists but feels emotionally out of reach? That became their secret burden. And it forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. They were not ready to let you go. Beloved, this is where their emotional walls began to crack. Not dramatically. Slowly. One memory at a time. One realization at a time. One night of thinking too deeply. One imagined future where your absence felt too permanent. They started to wonder whether holding on to pride was worth losing the connection. They started asking themselves whether being emotionally safe was actually making them happy. And then came the question that changed everything. If this person walked out of my life forever tomorrow, what would I wish I had said today? Your soulmate did not like the answer. Because there was so much. They would wish they had told you that your presence mattered. They would wish they had explained their confusion. They would wish they had apologized for moments when fear made them distant. They would wish they had told you that you entered their thoughts more often than you knew. They would wish they had admitted that something inside them recognized you long before they were emotionally prepared to understand why. And above all, they would wish they had told you the truth before silence became the final story between you. That thought has become unbearable. So now, their sentence carries a new ending. I never thought I'd have to say this to you, but I don't want silence to be the reason I lose you. Feel the weight of that. They are no longer only afraid of rejection. They are afraid of regret. And regret, beloved, can become a powerful teacher. It shows people the value of what they kept postponing. Your soulmate is starting to see you differently because they are seeing themselves differently. They are noticing where they allowed fear to make decisions. They are noticing where they expected you to understand things they never communicated. They are noticing where they confused emotional control with strength. And a new definition of strength is forming inside them. Strength might mean speaking. Strength might mean apologizing. Strength might mean admitting, I was scared. Strength might mean risking an uncertain answer because living forever with an unanswered question feels worse. But there is still one thing stopping them. One final truth. They do not know what version of you they will meet when they finally speak. Will they meet the version of you who still hopes? The version who still remembers? The version who would listen? Or the version who has already begun closing the door? This uncertainty is what has made their inner world so intense lately. They know they cannot control your response. They cannot rewrite every past moment. They cannot demand that you feel what you once felt. All they can control is whether they finally become honest. And beloved, something inside them is moving toward honesty faster than before. There may come a moment when their words do not sound polished. They may stumble. They may pause. They may begin with something ordinary because the truth feels too vulnerable to say immediately. But beneath whatever language they choose will be a deeper message. I do not want to keep pretending this meant less to me than it did. That is the confession beneath the confession. And yet, heaven shows another layer. Your soulmate has not only been hiding feelings. They have been hiding a decision. A decision they began making quietly after realizing how close they may be to losing the connection. This decision is not about forcing a future. It is about changing how they show up. They are considering doing something they previously avoided, becoming emotionally clear. No more vague signals. No more hoping you decode silence. No more pretending everything is fine when something remains unresolved. They know that whatever happens next must be built on truth. But before they can take that step, they feel they owe you an explanation. And that explanation begins with an apology they have rehearsed privately. They want to tell you they are sorry for the times you may have felt unimportant. Sorry for the moments when they withdrew instead of communicating. Sorry if their fear made you question your own worth. Sorry for expecting patience they never formally asked you to give. Sorry for allowing confusion to live where honesty should have been. Those words frighten them because apologies make people vulnerable in a different way. An apology means admitting that your actions affected someone. It means releasing the comfort of pretending nothing happened. And they know something happened. Even if the connection never had an official name. Even if there were no formal promises. Even if much of the story lived in feelings rather than declarations. Something real happened emotionally. They know it. You know it. And that is why the silence has never felt empty. It has felt full. Full of unsaid words. Full of questions. Full of moments that could have become something more. Full of emotional tension that time did not completely erase. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that unfinished connections remain powerful because the mind keeps returning to all the places where the story could have changed. What if they had spoken sooner? What if they had trusted more? What if they had stayed instead of pulling away? What if they had simply said, "This matters to me"? Those questions are haunting them more than they expected. But there is one question haunting them above all. What if I still have a chance to make this right? Beloved, that is the question moving through their heart now. And it changes everything. Because a person who believes something is permanently lost behaves differently from a person who suddenly wonders whether one honest conversation could change the entire direction of the story. Hope is returning. Carefully. Quietly. But powerfully. They are beginning to imagine telling you the full truth. Not a dramatic fantasy. A real conversation. They imagine looking at you and saying, "I know I confused you. I confused myself too." They imagine admitting that they thought distance would make their feelings disappear. It did not. They imagine telling you that they tried to move forward mentally while emotionally remaining attached to something unresolved between you. They imagine saying, "I never thought I'd have to say this to you. Because I thought I would figure myself out before it ever reached this point." And then comes the part they are still afraid to admit. They did figure something out. They discovered what they were actually afraid of. It was not you. It was not love itself. It was the possibility that you could become important enough to hurt them. That realization changed how they understood their behavior. Sometimes people do not run because they feel nothing. Sometimes they run because they feel something that threatens every defense they built after old disappointments. Your soulmate thought emotional distance gave them control. But eventually they discovered that distance has its own pain. And now the pain of staying silent is becoming stronger than the pain of speaking. That is why this moment feels different. Something is reaching completion inside them. A cycle of avoidance. A cycle of overthinking. A cycle of waiting for the perfect moment. They are beginning to understand there may never be a perfect moment. There may only be a courageous one. And beloved, they are moving toward it. But before part 1 closes, heaven reveals the most surprising detail. The sentence, "I never thought I'd have to say this to you," is not the message they fear saying most. There is another sentence behind it. A sentence they have not allowed themselves to speak aloud even in an empty room. A sentence that explains why they have been so emotionally unsettled. A sentence that could completely change how you understand every moment of distance between you. Your soulmate has tried several times to push this sentence away because once spoken, it cannot be taken back. It would expose exactly how deeply this connection affected them. It would reveal that their biggest fear is no longer being rejected. Their biggest fear is that when they finally tell you the truth, you may look at them calmly and say, "You realized it too late." And that possibility has awakened something urgent inside them. Because now they know there is one truth they cannot keep postponing. A truth about what they actually want. A truth about the future they secretly imagined with you. A truth about why they could never fully replace the feeling your presence created. And the exact words they are preparing to say next begin with, "I never told you this because I was terrified you would know how much power you had over my heart, but the truth is, when I imagined losing you, I finally understood what I had been trying not to admit." And beloved, what they are about to admit after those words is the part that changes everything.